Now here's a picture of a peregrine falcon. And the background is, well, clearly out of focus, and it's just green grass and stuff. But maybe you want to put this onto a different background. Maybe you want to get rid of this background so you could put, say, like a blue sky behind it or something. We need to get this background gone with just a bird, and we're going to put a little gradient in behind it to kind of make like a fake sky. How could we get that bird selected? I mean, we could try the magic wand, the lasso. It might be tough to kind of get all those edges. And if we did the quick select, we may find that, it'll grab more of the, there's another way of selecting called color range command. Let's give that a try. Now we need to do something to make a selection. So let's look under the select menu. And there's this thing called color range. And if we click on that, we get a new window popping up. And normally we just tell it we want to select sampled colors. But if you had an image that had a lot of strong reds or different colors in it, you could tell it to select the reds or the yellows or the greens or the cyans, the blues, magentas, or the highlights or the midtones or the shadows or skin tones. If there were some people in there and you want to just kind of play around with the skin tones or play around with everything except the skin tones, you could tell it to select skin tones. But we're going to stay with sampled colors. And much like the magic wand, when you click on the image, let's say I click on his feathers up here, it'll select anything within a certain, well, with the magic wand it was tolerance. With color range, it's fuzziness. I don't know why they call it that. But if you play around with the fuzziness, let's say you bring it up or bring it down, you'll see that it'll select more or less of the image. So this is kind of like adjusting the threshold in real time. Now, we can also add to the selected area. Like if I click somewhere else, I click here, oh no, it's not getting all of them. Oh, it's not getting all of them. Oh, it's not getting all of them. And I think, oh, I'll just crank this fuzziness up really. Even at maximum, it's not getting all of him, and it's starting to get some of the background. So clearly bringing the fuzziness up isn't the ticket there. What if we went to this little plus sign eyedropper? If you click on that little plus sign eyedropper, we could add to the selected parts of the bird. Okay, let's bring that fuzziness down. You know what? This still isn't working very well. I can't find a combination where I'm able to get all of the bird selected. Like I'm still missing the nostrils or the nares on the bird here, and it's still getting some of the background. What might be a better way to try to get this bird selected? We're trying to select the bird, aren't we? Which has yellows and blacks and whites and all kinds of stuff through it. What if we selected the background instead? Sometimes if what you're trying to cut out is on a fairly smooth background, it's easier to select the background than the object. Once you have a selection, you can always invert the selection. So you'll have the opposite of what you had selected. So let's give that a try. If you've got the plus eyedropper turned on, you'll definitely want to go back to the regular old eyedropper. When you click, it'll drop everything that it was selecting before and just choose what you click on. And we can play around with the fuzziness. And if I crank that fuzziness up too high again, I can get that whole background pretty much, but it starts getting some of the bird. So I'll bring this down to where it's not quite getting the bird. I'll go back to my add to samples, and I'll just click in the areas where I see it's having trouble. Now you can click in this image here, or you can click in this little preview image. So I can click on these little gray bits around here. And it's starting to pick up some of his feathers, so maybe I'll ease that fuzziness down a little bit. Missing the corner. Yeah. So that's a way of making a selection as well. Now in this case, if I hit OK now, I would end up with the background selected and not the bird. That wouldn't be a problem. I could just go under Select and then Inverse. That would invert the selection. Or I can actually invert it right here. If I click on this little Invert tab and I hit OK, I now have the bird selected. If we wanted to put a new sky, say, behind this bird, it would probably be easiest if we put it below the bird's layer, wouldn't it? When you're looking at your image, it's like you're looking down through your layer stack. So if we were to get rid of the background behind the bird, we could put a sky back there. Now we just went through all that effort to select the bird, didn't we? That's okay, that's okay. Let's give it a layer mask. Click the new layer mask icon. Remember I said we're gonna go through, it'll select the sky and then we inverted it and it selected the bird. When you add a new layer mask, it will be based on the selection, okay. So now we've gotten rid of that background and we wanna make a sky. Let's try the gradient tool. You guys ever heard of a gradient? Basically, it's a transition from one thing to another. Now, if your layer mask comes up the wrong way around and you have a background no bird, do a Command I or Image, Adjustments, Invert. That'll invert your layer mask. Now, I'm going to make a new transparent layer. So at the bottom of the layers panel, you'll see that little, looks like a rectangle with the corner folded up in between the trash can and the folder icon there. If you click on that, it'll make a new transparent layer. We know it's transparent because it has that checkerboard pattern through it. Now let's grab the gradient tool. If you hit G on the keyboard, it should take you to the gradient tool, which is this little fella right here. Looks like a rectangle with, oddly enough, a gradient in it. And it'll show a preview of what sort of a gradient you're going to get up top. And right now, I seem to have a foreground to background gradient. My foreground is green and my background is white. Now, it could also be a foreground to white. I don't know yet. But here's what we're going to do. Is a blue sky the same blue the whole way across? If you're looking across and you got like a blue sky, there's a blue on the horizon and then it goes up to blue up above. Is it the same blue the whole way around? No, it tends to be a little kind of lighter on the horizon, going to a little bit darker. So if I just put a blue layer back here, it would look kind of fake. But what if I had a light blue as a foreground and a darker blue as a background, and I put a gradient behind? That might look a little bit more convincing. To play around with your colors, if you click on the little square, see at the bottom of your tools panel, you got two little squares there. If you click on the top one, the color picker pops up. Let's go over this color picker. It lets you pick colors by clicking in this window here, but this window has some limited control. There's also this slider over here. Now this is showing us our color in HSB mode: hue, saturation, and brightness. This is our hue slider. So if you move these little lines up and down, you can choose a different hue. So I'm going to pick blue because I want a blue sky. So there's my kind of blue sky-y sort of look. And then we're left with saturation and brightness. Saturation, we decided, was how close to pure a color was. And saturation is the left-right axis in this square here. Anything on the left side will be no saturation. It'll be some kind of a shade of gray. And the right side will always be the most saturated version of that color. And lightness, or brightness as they call it here, is the up-down axis. Anything on the bottom will always be pure black. Anything at the top will always be the brightest version of that color. So if you wanted the most vibrant, saturated version of whatever hue you've chosen, go to the absolute top right. If you want to drop the saturation, start going left. And if you want to drop the brightness, start going down. So I'm going to choose two kind of sky blue colors, one a little bit lighter for the horizon and one a little bit darker. I'll call that my horizon blue, and I'll hit OK. And the background color, I'm going to click on my background square there, and I'm going to choose a bit of a darker color for the top of my sky. And I'll hit OK. The way the gradient tool works is it makes a gradient between whatever you've got chosen. So right now I've got my foreground to background. So if I were to click and drag, it would make a light blue to a dark blue gradient. And, well, let's just give it a try. I'm going to do a click and a drag. Now, wherever you start, see, I started down at the bottom there, and then I went straight up. So my foreground color will be below that starting point. My background color will be above the ending point, and the transition will be in between those two little plus signs. So a little plus sign down here, and this little plus sign up here. So I've done a fairly long gradient, and when I let go, boink. So from below where I started is my foreground color. After where I ended is my background color, and everything in between is a transition. What happened to my bird? He's gone. Did it fly away? Remember I said it's like we're looking down through this stack of layers here. I'm seeing the sky, and it takes up the entire canvas, so I can't see anything below it. You can change stacking orders. If you grab this, you can drag it down, and see this dark line below layer 0, and there's a dark line in between them as well. When you drag it over that dark line, you'll see it'll kind of get bold or bluish. That tells you where it's going to drop that layer. So when I get it below, see how that line goes blue? When I let go, boink, it drops it below. And there's my bird with my gradient in the sky. So drag that down so it's below the bird. Guys, remember I said when I click somewhere and I drag somewhere, that's how kind of long that gradient would be. If I do a click down, I can click off the window. I could start way down below there, go way up to the top, And that's a really smooth gradient. In fact, there's no foreground color here. It started off the bottom, and there's no background color. If I do a small jump, that's a really short gradient. And if I change angles, if I do a 45-degree angle, it's a 45-degree gradient. So you can make it as harsh or as soft as you want, and you can make it any angle you want. You could even make the top of the sky lighter than the bottom, which is totally artificial looking. And you can just keep clicking and dragging until you see it looking the way you want. If you want it to be a little bit lighter, start a little bit higher up. If you want it to be a little bit darker, you can start lower down and finish higher up. I think I like that one. There we go. And remember, it's this layer mask that is hiding the background so it becomes see-through. Now, sometimes the layer might be not entirely see-through, and it may be hard to tell just by looking at the image. This layer mask can actually be made visible. If you hold down the Option key and click right on the layer mask, look at what happens. It becomes visible. And that can make it really easy to see if anything got missed. So hold down the Option key, click on the layer mask, and this will show the layer mask itself. And look at what's going on back here. The bird itself looks pretty good. I think it did pretty good on the bird, but some of this background didn't quite get included. Not a problem. You can paint on a layer mask at any time. If I were to grab a paintbrush, if I just hit B on the keyboard, you notice that I have black and white as my foreground and background here. So right now I'll be painting with white. That's not good. If I hit X on the keyboard though, look at what happens. It reverses them, and now I can get rid of those little bits of gray in the background. And like I said, it's hard to see what that was doing, but you can just see a little bit of that green behind the bird showing up through that background there. So by looking at the layer mask, I can see these little bits of gray that we're letting it show through, and I can paint over top of them. Now for something like this, it's probably better to use a hard brush. Take a look at this. The brush I've got right now has a fairly soft edge. So if I start getting closer to the bird himself, look at what can happen. See this kind of almost like a burn mark that happened in here. If I use a hard edge brush, if I take this hardness and bring it all the way up to 100, look at what happens. Ah, there we go. I can get rid of that stuff without worrying about kind of bleeding into the bird there. And if I do accidentally cut into the bird, it's certainly much more noticeable than if I was using a soft-edged brush. And then just Option click on the layer mask again to make the image itself visible. Now guys, when you're painting on the layer mask, you want to make sure that you have pure black and pure white as your foreground and background colors. There's a fast way to get to that. If you click this little icon here, this will give you your default colors, or the keyboard shortcut is just hit D on the keyboard. D will give you pure black and pure white. If you're painting with gray, you're going to make it partly see-through. And I've often had cases where the students are trying to make something invisible. They're painting over it. I've got black, I'm at 100% opacity, and I'm painting away, and it won't quite, it's always there, kind of ghostly looking. And if you look, it's not quite black. It's just really, really dark gray, but not quite black. So if you ever need to make sure you have pure black, click that little icon there or just hit D on the keyboard. And if it gets you the wrong color, like say you needed black, but of course this will give you white, if you hit X on the keyboard, it'll reverse your foreground and background colors.